In the early 1980s, Mexico faced difficult times. The government was trying to suppress drug trafficking, but at the same time, corruption and violence were spreading throughout the region. Amidst this situation, an organization emerged that would change the course of organized crime in the country. This organization became known as the Guadalajara Cartel. This group became the forerunner of the modern drug cartel system, which would later influence the way cartels operate throughout Mexico. They were not just a collection of dealers or smugglers. They were a network that united various small groups into a larger, more organized, and far more powerful system. In a short time, the Guadalajara Cartel dominated the transnational drug trade, controlling the supply chain from Colombia to the United States market. Their success was not solely due to violence, but also to the organization's ability to build relationships with the authorities and officials who were supposed to enforce the law. However, behind this great success lurked a dark story that marked the beginning of the modern drug war. Murder, corruption, and power became part of everyday life within their network. And from here, the story of how the Guadalajara Cartel stood, triumphed, collapsed, and left its long legacy begins.
Battle has reached all the way to the top levels of illegal drug trade in Mexico.
The Guadalajara Cartel's origins date back to the Mexican state of Sinaloa in the late 1970s. This region has long been known as a center for opiate and marijuana production. This is where three figures emerged who would later form one of the most influential crime networks in Mexican history: Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo was a man with exceptional organizational and strategic skills. Before entering the drug business, he had worked as a federal police agent and had connections with several influential officials. From this experience, Félix Gallardo understood how the security system worked and how to control it. He was known for his intelligence, caution, and structure-oriented nature. He later earned the nickname El Padrino, the Godfather, for his ability to unite various small groups into a large, coordinated network. Rafael Caro Quintero came from a different background. He was a young farmer from Sinaloa who successfully developed an industrial-scale marijuana plantation. He introduced modern cultivation methods such as irrigation systems and the use of superior sinsemilla varieties, which produced high-quality products. Caro Quintero was known for his ambition and aggressiveness, often making quick decisions without much deliberation. He controlled much of the production and management of the narcotics fields in northern Mexico. The third figure, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, known as Don Neto, served as the liaison between production, distribution, and intergroup relations. He was older and more experienced than his two colleagues. Don Neto had a reputation for calming internal conflicts and maintaining balance among members. He also played a key role in organizing logistics and profit sharing among the operational areas. These three men established a structure unlike any other criminal group of their time. They focused not only on sales or smuggling, but also created a federation model, where several smaller groups operated autonomously but under central coordination. Through this system, they successfully united organizations from Sinaloa, Sonora, Durango, and Jalisco into one large, efficient, and integrated network. In the early stages, their primary businesses were marijuana and heroin, but over time, they saw a much greater opportunity in the cocaine trade. At the time, Colombian cartels, specifically the Medellin cartel led by Pablo Escobar, were seeking alternative routes to ship goods to the United States. The Caribbean route was becoming risky due to increased American surveillance. Felix Gallardo capitalized on the situation by offering Mexico as a safer land route. This deal transformed the Guadalajara Cartel into a key link between Colombia and the American market. To keep their operations running, they built a protection network involving government officials, police, and the military. Large sums of money were used to buy loyalty and turn a blind eye to their illegal activities. In many cases, the authorities actually facilitated operations by providing information, protection, and access to official facilities. The reciprocal relationship between the criminal organization and law enforcement officials was a crucial factor in their success. Operationally, the Guadalajara Cartel developed a complex and efficient smuggling system. They used small planes, ships, and hidden land routes to move their goods. In some locations, they established private airstrips in the desert where planes from Colombia could land safely. The goods were then shipped to various storage points in Mexico before being forwarded to the United States via the northern border. In addition to their logistical strength, they also had a well-organized internal structure. Felix Gallardo managed inter-regional coordination and political relations. Caro Quintero focused on production and farm management, and Don Neto was responsible for distribution and relations with foreign networks. This combination allowed them to function like a large corporation, complete with a clear communication system and division of responsibility. Their initial success was not without risks. Competition with other groups and pressure from the government forced them to continue expanding their influence and tighten control over their territories. As profits increased, internal conflicts began to emerge, particularly between groups who felt they had a greater share of the business. However, under Felix Gallardo's leadership, the system remained stable because all parties remained bound by common economic interests.
By the early 1980s, the Guadalajara Cartel had reached its most powerful period in its history. Under the coordination of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, the organization controlled nearly all of Mexico's drug trade. They were no longer mere smugglers, but rather transnational business operators, functioning like a large, well-planned corporation. Their business model was simple but effective. Goods were shipped from Colombia to Mexico, then forwarded to the United States via land and sea. Cartel leaders established direct ties with Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel, establishing Mexico as a key shipping route after the Caribbean route was heavily controlled by the United States. From this arrangement, the Guadalajara Cartel received a significant portion of the profits in exchange for guarantees of secure distribution. Felix Gallardo served as the network's primary controller. He managed supply lines, ensured stable relationships with Colombian suppliers, and divided operational territories among the groups. Caro Quintero managed marijuana and heroin farms in northern Mexico. Its production spanned thousands of hectares, complete with modern irrigation systems and armed guards. Meanwhile, Don Neto, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, managed the distribution and logistics flow, ensuring that goods arrived on time without interference from the authorities. The revenue from this trade reached extraordinary levels. A single large shipment of goods entering the United States could reach hundreds of millions of dollars. The proceeds were channeled to Mexico through a sophisticated money laundering system. Fictitious companies, real estate projects, agricultural businesses, and even investments in legitimate sectors. As a result, many regions in northwest Mexico experienced a false economic growth fueled by the cartel's money. This enormous success was inextricably linked to political patronage and official corruption. The Guadalajara Cartel paid officials, police officers, and even members of the military to turn a blind eye to its activities. Some officials even facilitated operations by providing information on planned raids or law enforcement. This reciprocal relationship created a system of protection that was difficult to penetrate, making the organization virtually immune to the law. To maintain internal stability, the cartel enforced strict discipline. Every member was required to adhere to established structures and rules. Violations were considered treason and met with violent retribution. In this way, they maintained fear and obedience throughout their ranks. Their power stemmed not only from money, but also from a reputation for brutality against anyone who opposed them. In addition to controlling the drug trade, the Guadalajara Cartel also began expanding its social and economic influence. In some areas, they were seen as a provider of jobs and a source of financial assistance. Cartel money was used to build homes, repair roads, and assist local communities. The goal was simple: to cultivate community loyalty and ensure social acceptance of their operations. At the height of its power, the Guadalajara Cartel operated with virtually no serious competition. They controlled air, sea, and land routes, regulated black market prices, and channeled substantial profits to various legitimate businesses. All strategic decisions centered on Felix Gallardo, who acted as the main coordinator. Through this network, they shipped thousands of tons of cocaine to the United States each year, making it one of the most prosperous criminal organizations in the world at the time. However, this great success also brought great concern. United States law enforcement agencies, particularly the DEA, began to notice a drastic increase in drug trafficking coming from Mexico. The Guadalajara Cartel's activities began to be monitored more closely, and several covert operations were conducted to uncover its network. This is where the beginning of a major conflict between this criminal organization and the United States government began to take shape.
On February 7, 1985, DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena was kidnapped from his home in Guadalajara while investigating a major drug operation. Camarena allegedly played a key role in a major raid on a marijuana plantation called Rancho Buffalo a year earlier, and the kidnapping was a direct response to a perceived threat from traffickers. Following the kidnapping, Camarena was detained and tortured for approximately 2 days. The torture was reportedly intense and included interrogations about his sources of information and networks working against drug trafficking. Forensic evidence and testimony indicated that the torture was brutal and culminated in his murder before his body was discovered on March 5, 1985, in rural Michoacán. The investigation strongly suspected key figures in the Guadalajara Cartel. U.S. prosecutors and investigators alleged that Rafael Caro Quintero ordered the kidnapping and murder in response to the substantial losses suffered as a result of the Rancho Buffalo raid. In addition to Caro Quintero, several other individuals associated with the network were also suspected of involvement in the operation. These allegations formed the basis for law enforcement operations and arrests in the months that followed. The United States government's response to Camarena's death was swift and coordinated. The DEA launched a major operation known as Operation Leyenda, a multi-agency investigation involving the FBI, intelligence agencies, and Mexican authorities in a limited capacity, with the goal of identifying and apprehending the perpetrators and dismantling the network behind the killing. This operation generated significant diplomatic pressure on the Mexican government to act decisively. Within a short time of its disclosure, several key figures were arrested and prosecuted. Rafael Caro Quintero was arrested in Costa Rica in April 1985 and later convicted in Mexico for his involvement. Several associates and officials who helped carry out or cover up the case were also sanctioned. However, the legal process was not always smooth.
The case spawned allegations of corruption, information leaks, and procedural irregularities that complicated cross-border law enforcement efforts. The impact of this event was international. Camarena's murder triggered a wave of tougher enforcement operations from abroad, increased interagency coordination to target high-profile targets, and reduced the latitude for some previously relatively protected cartel structures. Politically, U.S.-Mexico relations were significantly strained. Public pressure in the United States to address the perpetrators led to diplomatic demands and tighter conditions for cooperation. That's why one event, the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Enrique Kiki Camarena, was not only an individual tragedy, but also triggered a major shift in international counter-drug efforts and the historical trajectory of Mexican cartels.
The decline of the Guadalajara Cartel's power began after a wave of law enforcement operations triggered by a major bust in the mid-1980s. Several key figures were initially arrested in 1985, when Mexican authorities conducted a major operation targeting leaders most directly linked to the violence and networks uncovered by international investigations. These arrests reduced the organization's ability to conduct coordinated operations on its previous scale. Facing legal pressure and external threats, the top leadership restructured. Before losing complete control, one of the leaders decided to divide its operational territory into several plazas, formal divisions of territory and routes, which were then assigned to independent local leaders. This move was intended to reduce the risk that a single legal blow could wipe out the entire structure, and also to manage operations through local overseers. This division, implemented in the late 1980s, is considered a key moment in changing the landscape of organized crime in Mexico. The next arrest of a key figure came in 1989. With the loss of the Central Coordination Center, many long-time members chose to withdraw and form their own organizations. From this territorial division emerged new groups focused on specific routes. One took the Tijuana route, another the Juárez route, and another controlled the Pacific Coast and Sinaloa. This division transformed a centralized entity into several competing autonomous organizations. The fragmentation had a direct impact on patterns of violence and competition. As new entities claimed control over routes and markets, territorial disputes escalated. Competition previously regulated by internal agreements turned into open conflict. Contests over plazas were fought with more frequent and brutal physical enforcement. As a result, levels of local and transnational violence soared, and the stabilization mechanisms of the Federation era were no longer effective. In the legal and diplomatic realm, the international response also accelerated the breakdown of old structures. Political pressure from the United States and coordinated enforcement operations forced Mexican courts and law enforcement to take previously difficult actions. Some leaders were brought to trial, others were imprisoned for long periods, while those who escaped went into hiding or transitioned to new criminal networks. The result was a rapid shift in leadership and the distribution of power in the cross-border drug trade. The period of collapse was also marked by a shift in organizational strategy, from relatively closed central control to a more fragmented and competitive model. This new model enabled the growth of the cartels we now recognize, some of which took advantage of the resulting space to strengthen their networks, recruit new followers, and develop more systematic, violent tactics. In the medium to long term, this fragmentation set the stage for the prolonged conflict and escalation of the drug war that followed in the following decades.
In short, the collapse of the Guadalajara Cartel was not a single event, but rather a series of arrests, divisions of strategic territory, and competitive reactions that fragmented the organization into several powerful new actors. The move to reduce legal exposure actually opened up opportunities for more players and for a wave of violence that permanently changed Mexico's criminal landscape. After the collapse of the Guadalajara Cartel, its legacy was not lost. In fact, from its destruction, a new generation of cartels emerged that shaped the face of modern drug trafficking in Mexico. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo's territorial division laid the foundation for three major cartels: the Sinaloa Cartel, the Tijuana Cartel, and the Juárez Cartel. Each group inherited the networks, routes, and operating systems of the older organization. Younger leaders like Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, and Amado Carrillo Fuentes leveraged their experience and old connections to build their own empires. In a short time, they expanded their operations to surpass those of their predecessors, but also brought with them a significantly higher level of violence. Beyond their direct influence on the successor cartels, the Guadalajara Cartel also left behind a standard operating pattern: the use of corruption for protection, the plaza system of territorial division, and business relationships with Colombian cartels. This model was later adopted by nearly every major drug organization that followed. To this day, the Guadalajara Cartel remains a frequent reference in the history of modern organized crime, not because of its continued existence, but because of the lasting impact it left. This marked the beginning of a new era of drug trafficking, bigger, more complex, and more brutal. The Guadalajara Cartel may have long since disbanded, but the systems, connections, and influence it created live on under various new names. Its legacy forms the foundation of the drug conflict that continues to this day, a legacy that has never truly faded.